The job of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs is to use the instruments of state to defeat and combat anti-Semitism. That's one of our goals. And we are very, very active right now in Europe, and which brings me to first some bad news and then to some good news. The bad news is that Jewish communities in many places in Europe are feeling deeply victimized. They sense a threat to their existence which is structural and not short-term, and which will continue. And they feel trapped between a population which is unacculturated and anti-Semitic, and the possibility that these very populations will bring the rise of far-right anti-Semitic parties to power. That's the bad news. The good news, however, is that Europe is beginning to understand this situation, and there are particular countries like France which understand it very well. In fact, Israel has a formal dialogue with France and with the European Union about combating anti-Semitism. I can report that this is the only dialogue that survived during the period when we were very, very angry at Europe over labeling. Nevertheless, we still met and we spoke formally about anti-Semitism. What is it that we want to do? We want to do two primary things. Number one, we want Europe, the European Union and its member states, to adopt a formal definition of anti-Semitism. Why is this important? Without it, we can't use existing legislation, we can't monitor it, police departments don't know how properly to train for it, they don't know when they see anti-Semitism in the streets, when they see Itbach al Yehud, they don't understand that it's anti-Semitic, so we want a formal definition of anti-Semitism. Of course, this formal definition should include an unambiguous reference to attacks on the legitimacy of Israel and Holocaust denial. This is something that we are working on. Our model is the definition of anti-Semitism, which appears on the site of the United States State Department. And therefore, we need all of your organizations and all of your contacts with European governments or with the EU to push this issue. The second issue is a little bit more controversial vis-a-vis Americans, and it comes to some of the things which Ido showed you and which we saw in the clips and which Yossi showed as well. The question is, what are internet platforms in fact? What is YouTube? What is Twitter? What is Facebook? What is a Google search engine? Is it a digital expanded version of Hyde Park? Is it a free speech corner? Or is it something which is much more similar to a radio station or a TV station or even a newspaper in the public domain? Why are we tolerating this level of incitement on these new platforms and saying that they are protected in a holy way by free speech? How is it possible that the government of France or the European Union and Israel all feel that incitement in the Arabic language on social media platforms carried out in Europe, calling for actual physical attacks on Jews and others, how is it possible that this is permitted and that there is not a requirement from the industry to do something about it? So we are working on, together with the Europeans, on moving forward a number of steps regarding hate speech and anti-Semitism on the web. Number one is we want the internet industry to adopt a standard for what is hate speech and what is anti-Semitism, which by their own laws of operation, they say they will not host on their sites. Number two, we want the industry to be required to take responsibility for what they are hosting and enabling. Right now, whenever we meet with Facebook or with representatives of the industry, they say, if you complain, we will respond to the complaints and we will do it quickly. But our question is, why is it necessary to complain? Why can't they self-regulate? If a company knows to deliver a specific ad specifically to your Facebook page, specifically at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then they also know how to detect speech in Arabic which is calling to stab someone in the neck. So we think that it's actually outrageous that the companies are not willing to deal with this. These are all American companies. They're all hiding behind the First Amendment. And Israel actually is finding itself in quite a like-minded state with the European Union and other countries, because eventually we don't think that the industry will correct itself unless there will be regulatory requirements by governments. The last thing I wanted to say is I'm also, in addition to dealing with world Jewish affairs, I'm also in charge in the Foreign Ministry on world religions. And we have a very difficult summer coming up vis-a-vis the mainline Protestants. We have general conferences by the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and the Lutherans. The Methodists are going to entertain 4 BDS resolutions, and it's not going to be an easy situation. The Presbyterians adopted BDS 2 years ago, and now there is talk of a possible adoption of a resolution which will call for one state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. In other words, they're going to hide it, but it's essentially going to be calling for a one state for Israelis and Palestinians, and it will not be called Israel. The Lutherans are also under a lot of pressure, but it's at least their leadership opposes BDS, and they don't have the same kind of structure of voting. What are we going to do about it? Israel, as MFA and other parts of the Israeli government which are dealing with BDS, are already in touch with the relevant organizations within the President's Conference who have the necessary expertise for dealing with this issue, and we are also dealing with all the rabbinic organizations. It's actually quite difficult because these organizations, the Methodist Conference, the Presbyterian Conference, are closed systems. Imagine if another religion came to the RCA or the CCAR and involved itself in the resolution process within those organizations. That's in fact what we're doing, but of course the Jewish conferences, rabbinic conferences, which would never adopt such offensive resolutions. We're going to do this. I want to end with a question. Why are we doing this? Maybe we should just ignore it. I'm not saying that we should ignore BDS, but the Presbyterians are shrinking as a religious denomination in the United States. Why should we care if they adopt a resolution calling for a one-state solution? The Methodists are also there. So they'll do it. So what? Is it worth the effort? My answer is it's worth the effort for 4 reasons. Number 1, because the resolutions being entertained are completely outrageous. I had a meeting this week with the Secretary General of the World Conference of Churches, who is here in Israel and in the territories, launching a 1-week campaign called Water Justice in Palestine. I asked him, in this week, are you giving an opportunity to any Israeli governmental, academic, or otherwise to present Israel's understanding of the water situation over the Green Line? His answer was, why should we? You are the occupier. In other words, these resolutions are outrageous, and therefore we should not tolerate them. Number 2, I think for purposes of Israeli and the morale of the Jewish people, there is no reason that we have to wake up twice or 3 times this summer to New York Times headlines announcing the divestment from Israel by another mainline Protestant church. We have to make sure this doesn't happen. A 3rd reason, Hillary Clinton is a Methodist. It's not so marginal as we would like to think. And 4th, and I think the most important reason, is because I think that in dealing with these issues, we should not be asking ourselves the question of how important these churches are or are they not. We need to have a muscular and aggressive approach to defend the legitimacy of Israel. And that means that we need to engage these issues when they are, even if they're difficult, even if they don't have any economic meaning. We need to, like it said, we need not to be behind walls, we need to be out there.